Ears and Beers, episode 30. What's on tap for today? We're all pissed off about the bowl game against Minnesota. But first, what are we drinking? I am once again drinking a Hop Farm light lager. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the can here beside me next to my Bob Huggins bobblehead. Hop Farm, perhaps my favorite brewery in the Pittsburgh area. We're spoiled up here. A lot of good breweries up here. Hop Farm at the top of my list. Love the light lager. Salud. All right, let's get into it. I'm going to need about a dozen beers to get through this one. It was ugly. It was painful to watch from the start, especially because it was past all of our bedtimes. I thought the WVU defense performed admirably. They did their part to, at least in theory, keep WVU in the game, particularly early. But aside from that, whole lot of bad. Really, the only positive that I'm taking from that game is that if it wasn't for the defense, the game would have been over in the first quarter. But that's about all that I got. Aside from one nice scoring drive from the offense, they gave you absolutely nothing. It was painful to watch. It was tough to watch. And it was the same story all night. You had no protection. You had no blitz recognition. You had no awareness from Daggy. And it all just combined to give you that putrid performance. You know, I heard Brad Howell, who I love listening to, say this on Metro News, and it's perfect. If you just look at Jarret Doege's jersey after the game, that kind of tells the story of everything. I mean, Doege looked like he had been a dog who just went and rolled around in mud for a couple hours. I think that's very well put by Brad Howell. That kind of tells the story. You got dominated in the trenches on both sides of the football, but particularly on offense. The insane stat to me is Jarret Doege dropped back to pass 31 times. He was pressured on 24 of those 31 dropbacks. You just got cooked in the trenches, particularly on offense. We all know that Jarret Doege is not a mobile quarterback. I'm not breaking any news in that department, right? When you keep him upright, when you keep him protected, he can make some plays. He can make throws. He can help you win games. He certainly has his limitations. We all know, listen, Jarret Doege right now is the hot button topic in Mountaineer Nation. And it's not just because people are overreacting, which I think we are in a little way, overreacting to that bowl game against Minnesota. But these are the same issues that have popped up all year. When WVU's won games, when WVU has played well, they've been able to run the football. They've had success in the trenches. Doege has been comfortable and protected enough to sit back there and make the throws that he needs to make. When they lose games, hey, maybe not as bad as it was late Tuesday night, but it looks a lot like it did against Minnesota. The offensive line can't protect. Doege, maybe chief most amongst his limitations, other than his lack of mobility, is the fact that he does get rattled easily. Now, I don't know if you can hold that against him as much from the Minnesota game because he was getting blasted every play. But we also do know he is a guy that can get shook a little bit, that can get rattled a little bit, that when he's facing a lot of pressure, you know, he can just kind of go into a shell and things can kind of spiral and get worse and worse. And I think that's what we saw on Tuesday night against Minnesota. But here's where I'm at. It's like Doomsday me now that it's been a day and a half since that game Tuesday night. And I apologize for making you wait so long for the instant reaction here. But it's like Doomsday me versus realistic me. And here's what I keep going back and forth on that. And here's what I mean. Doomsday me has been sitting here for the last 36 hours thinking this team had weeks to prep and there was still no offense. And we just finished 6-7. There's no real progress. We didn't see the step forward that we wanted to see this year. And what looked like an offensive line that was starting to figure it out took a big step back. What looked like some wide receivers who were starting to make some plays didn't have that ability on Tuesday night. We stink, and we're going to lose to Pitt in September, right? Like that's Doomsday me. Realistic me is saying, you know, Minnesota's a much better team than we are. They just are. They finished 8-4. They blew games to Bowling Green and to Illinois. Two games that they should have easily won against Bowling Green State University and against Illinois. They lost both of those. If they win both of those games, they finish the regular season 10-2, and they're nowhere close to sniffing the guaranteed rate bowl. Minnesota had a disappointing season in that context. They still finished 9-4, which for Minnesota football is pretty good. But they should have been 10-2. They're a better team than WVU. They're much better on the offensive line. They're better on the defensive line. They got a better quarterback. I think they got a better coaching staff, as much as that pains me to say. They're just a better team. They got more veterans on both sides of the ball. They should have been 10-2, not 8-4 this year. And I also do love, like, how we all act like the bowl games don't matter until we lose one like that. So that's the balance between doomsday me and realistic me. But I do know one thing, and that's that Minnesota team kind of plays the style of football that I think WVU should aspire to. You know, being great in the trenches, being buttoned up. And that's what Minnesota, like, they just did what we all knew that they were going to do. You know, Minnesota's like a good version of the Cleveland Browns. You know how the Cleveland Browns want to play, and that's by running the ball with Nick Chubb, hitting the occasional big play action pass, and getting after the quarterback on defense. That's how the Cleveland Browns like to play. It's kind of the same as Minnesota, right? They just did what they do, which is run the football, get after the quarterback, hit the occasional big play in the pass game. And WVU had no answer. And that's where I kind of come down on the doomsday side a little bit. You had weeks to prep for this. You had, I think, a dozen practices to prep for this, and you still weren't able to do squat. But I just keep coming back to progress. That's the key word, right? And where is it? Like, I think you have to judge a program like WVU, we all do, by progression. A head coach like Neil Brown, by progression, right? WVU is not Oklahoma or Ohio State or Clemson or Alabama, as much as we would all love to be, as much as our fan base, honestly, a good portion of our fan base deserves. I've long said you get the best 30 to 40,000 WVU fans in the world, and they're 30 to 40 the best sports fans you could imagine, because I think we've all kind of accepted we're probably not going to win a national championship. That ship has kind of sailed. The BCS era was our chance. We had a couple years where we had chances to do that, and we blew it. We don't expect 10-win season. Yeah, Clemson fans are bitching about a horrible year. They just had their 11th straight 10-win season. I don't think any WVU fan realistically expects our program to have 11 straight 10-win seasons. But what we do expect is certainly for it not to look as ugly as it looked on Tuesday night, and for us to be able to be one of the better mid-tier programs, to consistently win 7-8 games a year, and then to have those seasons where we jump up and win 9 or 10, maybe contend for a conference championship. But there was no real tangible progression this season from this team. Yeah, the defense was good, but the defense was good last year. The offensive line had its moments where they played really well, but they were so incredibly inconsistent. And this was a WVU team that, I know they're the youngest in the Big 12, but they also brought back a lot of key contributors at key positions. And it just feels like, you know, particularly on the offensive side of the football, where's the growth? Where's the progression? Again, defense, different conversation. I think they've done their job. They were really good last year, and they were pretty darn good this year. We'll see where things go. You know, you want to see what happens with Dante Stills, and if he comes back, that would obviously be massive. But it feels like the defense is going to continue to be solid. But who on offense has gotten better during Neil Brown's 3 years? You know, it's basically the same coaching staff around the head coach as well, too. The defense is good, but not good enough to carry this offense, to be saddled by this offense. That's where I'm at. And I think, you know, we can get so caught up in this year. We can get so caught up in the Neil Brown era. But this was an interesting stat. I had to write this down here. Shout out to Joel on Twitter. WVU over the last 5 seasons, right? If you include Dana's last 2 years, which, mind you, Will Grier was the quarterback for those last 2 years. Pretty good. Top 100 pick in the NFL. You take out the FCS schools, right? So Long Island University, James Madison. WVU's 500 against Power 5 teams in the last 5 years. 27-27 against FBS teams. Not just Power 5 teams, FBS teams. So again, no JMU, no Long Island, FBS schools. And again, that includes the 2 years of Will Grier. And that's an alarming trend because, again, I don't expect WVU to be Oklahoma or Clemson. But I certainly don't expect us to be 500 over a 5-year stretch where at one point in that stretch, I mean, Will Greer's senior year, right? We were ranked as high as number 6 or number 7 in the country at 5-1 or 6-1 at one point there before it all kind of started to unravel. It's frustrating. But I also, too, I keep coming back to that realistic side of this Minnesota team is just much better than WVU, much more veteran group than WVU. They should not have been in the Guaranteed Rate Bowl. And it's, I never know how much stock to put into a bowl game. I do know it's 2 out of 2 for Jarrett Daggy of really struggling in bowl games. Obviously, he was benched against Army last year. Austin Kendall came back in, won that game for WVU in the second half, along with a strong performance by the WVU defense. But it just seems like so many of the things that we had hoped were moving in the right direction came back and blew up in our face on Tuesday night. I want to be realistic and know that Minnesota's a much better team than we are. I want to be realistic and know that this is kind of what we do with bowl games, right? We act like they don't matter until we have a performance like we did on Tuesday. But it's rightfully so. 2022 is a massive year for the program, for Neil Brown, for everybody involved. We'll get into some more coaching changes. Crowley and I are going to record a podcast on Saturday after the Texas basketball game where we'll get into some deeper conversation here about the football program and about the bowl game and everything. But Neil has one more year to figure it out. And again, that doesn't mean that we have to go 11-1 and win the Big 12 next year, or we have to go 10-2 and be in the Big 12 championship game. We got to be competitive. We got to be entertaining. We've got to show improvement and progression. And yeah, I think at least 8 wins, but 7 really. If you start out the year, you beat Pitt, you beat Virginia Tech, maybe things unravel a little bit in Big 12 play. You go to Nico, you get your younger quarterback in, you play well at the end of the season, you finish 7-5, you win a bowl game, 8-5, something like that we could take. But there has to be real progression next year. If Jarrett Daggy comes back, and that's still up in the air, I'm hearing a lot of different things. I got a couple different sources around the program. My top source is telling me he's heard Daggy's coming back. I've heard from some other people that there's a chance Daggy could transfer or leave the program. Regardless, you can't run this thing back next year and go 7-5. Now, if you have Nico in there for a big portion of that, if you have Goose in there for a portion of that, and you finish 7-5, but there's some progress, again, that P word, that's different. But next year is the year for Neil Brown. I know he's got the big buyout. I know he's got the contract extension. But if you don't at least show some promise, show some potential, and play some entertaining football, you're going to lose even more of the fan base than you already have. And that's maybe the simplest way to put this. Like it's one thing to be mediocre, right? Which WVU has been now for 5 years, again, 27-27 against FBS schools. It's one thing to be mediocre. It's a whole nother to be mediocre and boring. And this team right now is mediocre and they're boring. Like at least in years of past, right? At least in 2012, when WVU finished 7-5, our first year in the Big 12, right? The 5-game win streak to start the year, then the 5-game collapse, then you win the last 2. At least you had Tavon Austin to watch, right? They were never boring. They might have been mediocre, but they were never boring. That's been a large part of, I think, WVU's history dating back to Rich Rod. The last 20 years almost. We all know WVU is not going to be a 9, 10, 11 win team every year. I don't think any of us realistically expect that. But you can't be mediocre and boring. And right now, they're mediocre and they're boring. And that's what leads to apathy amongst the fan base. And I think we're seeing that in waves right now. Hey, you go to Heinz Field and you beat Pitt in September and everybody will be back. But you start out next season, you really struggle. That apathy could creep in, I think, even more than it has. So Neil has one more year to figure it out. I'm not saying we got to have a Big 12 championship appearance, but you got to be competitive. You got to be entertaining. You got to show progress. I think particularly with a young quarterback. And I think it's time, too, to have some conversation about this coaching staff. You got to pay Jordan Leslie whatever he wants to stay. He's done a phenomenal job. Remember all that stuff with Kerry Martin and Vic Koenig, and Vic exits the program after a good year, and everyone, oh, my goodness, what's going to happen to the defense? We just let a player run out our defensive coordinator. The defense is fine, all right? They've been great the last 2 years. They're fine. Jordan Leslie, pay him whatever the hell he wants. Keep him around. Now, the question marks go to Gerard Parker, the offensive coordinator, Gerard Parker, the offensive coordinator, I always call him Gerard, and Matt Moore, the offensive line coach. I hear so much about how those guys are great recruiters, and I'm not trying to be naive here. That is important, particularly to a place like WVU. You got to be able to recruit. It's not Clemson, Oklahoma, Ohio State, where you just pluck dudes 4 and 5 stars everywhere. You got to be able to recruit. I don't want to sound naive in that, but recruiting can't be the end all be all. Because then you end up like Penn State, right, with James Franklin. James Franklin's an amazing recruiter. They got a roster loaded with talent and with guys who are probably going to play on Sundays. Look at the guys that Penn State's put into the NFL over the last couple of years. Hell, Micah Parsons is probably the best rookie in all of football right now. He's a former Penn State linebacker. They've got great talent. But you're winning 7 and 8 games a year because you don't have the X's and O's side of that. Matt Moore, I know he's buddies with Neil Brown, but the offensive line has at best plateaued. I know he's gotten the recruits, and I know that it's a young group on the offensive line, and all those guys are coming back, and they've got a chance to really grow and to be good. But that's got to happen. There's got to at least be signs of that happening throughout the season, right? And then for Parker, again, I don't know how much I can put on him when you've got the limitations of the offensive line and of Daggy. But again, 13 games this season and nothing changed. There was no progression. The offensive line was a roller coaster. They had weeks where they looked solid. They had weeks where they struggled. Letty Brown's a good player. Tony Mathis, how about him? He's encouraging. Maybe that's a good, a positive to take from the bowl game Tuesday. I don't think you should worry about life after Letty Brown. They're going to be fine with Tony Mathis and with Lynn J coming from Clemson. But where's the growth on offense? Where's the identity on offense? It's not there. And that to me starts with Neil Brown, with Moore, and with Parker. There's got to be some changes. And you've got to find a way to keep Jordan Leslie. That would be a disaster. I don't think there's going to be substantial changes. Feels like we're already at the point in the college coaching cycle where if WVU was going to make some changes, buddy, I don't know what you're waiting for. But as high as I am on Jordan Leslie, I'm that low on Parker and Moore. Something has to change. And again, I know when they got here, there was a bare cupboard. Dana Holgerson loaded up for 2018. That WVU team had 5 guys drafted, and 4 of them were on the offensive. No, sorry, 4 guys drafted, and 3 were on the offensive side of the football because our buddy David Sills did not get drafted somehow. But you had Will Greer, you had Jennings, you had Yanni Kajust, and you had David Long, all drafted. And plus, you had Sills in that group, too. You were loaded up in 2018. We know the cupboard was bare in 2019, but that's not an excuse now in 2021. There has to be growth. There has to be progression. And Deggy looks the same now as he did in 2019. A lot of these guys on the offensive line who we know are talented and have pedigree look the same now as they did at the start of the year. You got to look at the OC and you got to look at the offensive line coach, and you've got to have some tough conversations there. Maybe even some new personnel. But again, you're starting to get late in that cycle. Bowl games are almost over. Recruiting is in full gear. A lot of the turnover has already happened amongst college coaching staffs. That to me is concerning. I get my last takeaway from last night too is I do love how we do the bowl games don't matter until we lose one like that. That's, hey, just the way she goes. I'm trying not to get too down in the depths because, again, I don't think we should put a ton of stock into what we saw on Tuesday night, but at the same time, it's hard not to be discouraged by that. Even with what I think Minnesota being a much better team than us this year, you got to show something. And the offense for 3 straight years now has not. The defense is encouraging, but you got to have the offense in the Big 12, man. If you can get some semblance of an offense with the defense that we've seen over the past 2 years, that's how you get into a Big 12 championship game. But there's just too many stupid errors, too. Like, how in the hell do you start a second half kickoff with a delay of game? What are we doing? Yeah. How when the defense forces a turnover, do you put Garrett Green in there cold when he hasn't taken a snap all game, hasn't taken a snap in weeks? He proceeds to drop the snap, lose yards. You take him out. He doesn't see the field again. You bring Deggy back in. That drive is already shot when you needed points. You needed momentum there after your defense continued to keep you in the game. What are we even doing here? And now I'm starting to get back on the Doomsday side of things. This was supposed to be a short reaction pod. I've already rambled too much, but at least I thought the WVU offense was good with scripted drives, right? That was one thing that I thought I knew about this team. They script well. They start well. First possession, 3 plays, 2 yards. Second possession, 3 plays, 4 yards. Third possession, 5 plays, 0 yards. It's amazing that it wasn't a 3-score game at that point. Minnesota misses a chip shot field goal. The defense forces a fumble inside the red zone. You could have been down 21 points at the end of the first quarter. Probably should have been down 21 points at the end of the first quarter. But I also, it's a bowl game. They are quite often a crapshoot. All right, I got to wrap this up. I was trying to keep this short. Like I said, a couple days from now, Saturday, we'll get more in depth on a lot of these conversations. I want to talk about the coaching staff. I want to talk about the offense. I want to talk about that progression word with Adam Crowley. We'll do that on Saturday, as well as react to a big one against Texas in hoops. WVU Texas at noon on New Year's Day on Saturday. Going to be a big game for sure. So we'll be back this weekend to break down some hoops, to get more in depth, some conversation with Crowley, with these football concerns, because there are many. And what timing too, right? You got Pitt on the schedule for the next 4 years. You got Virginia Tech on the schedule. You got Penn State on the schedule. This is what we've been asking for a decade now. And the program's maybe at the lowest point that it has been in a decade. It's tough, but don't jump yet. Because with a little more creativity on offense, a little bit better of a performance from the offensive line, and just a capable quarterback, I know that's the big kicker. I do think this team is close. In a lot of areas, they're close. But in some facets, it feels like they're miles away. I think that is maybe the biggest frustration of the Neil Brown era. 2022 is going to be a doozy. And speaking of doozy, you got Pat Narduzzi in Pitt week 1. And, man, that is going to be an overreaction game for WVU in the fan base for sure. We win that game against Pitt. We're back. Neil Brown's the guy. Here we go. Trust the climb. We lose that game, and like I said, the apathy is going to creep in big time. But we've got a lot to get to before then. We've got to put a bow on this season, which I'll do with Crowley this weekend. And obviously, we keeping our eye on basketball. We'll have many more reaction podcasts to the hoops and everything like that as well. Enjoy your day, folks. Enjoy the new year. Be safe. If you're party rocking on New Year's, don't get behind the wheel of a car. All right, that's always my Thanksgiving Eve and New Year's Eve PSA. I like to drink beers. I like to have a good time. I like to party rock. But if you're doing that, please don't get behind the wheel of a car. Be smart. Have somebody drive you. Take an Uber or a Lyft, or just spend the night on the couch, whatever you got to do. But enjoy yourself, Mountaineer Nation. Make sure you tuned in on Saturday at noon for a big one against Texas in hoops. Oh, some good news, too, that I wanted to share. We are now on Spotify. I had to struggle with our iHeart overlords, because Spotify and iHeart, that's like Pepsi and Coke. It's like McDonald's and Chick-fil-A. It's like WVU and Pitt, right? They don't get along. They're competitors. But I know how many of you are on Spotify. I think particularly people like me who are in their early 30s, in their 20s, younger generation, always on Spotify. So Eers and Beers now available on Spotify. Make sure you're liking and subscribing and getting at us there, and on YouTube and everywhere as well. We're back this weekend for more conversation with the crowd, man. Let's go, Mountaineers. Let's go drink some beers.